Hello, everyone, and welcome to our best practices for implementing a customer data platform webinar. We thank you so much for joining us today. With me are David Spitz, our CMO, and Paul Mander, the VP of Professional Services. So just a couple of things before we get started. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you can't hear me or if you have any issues, please just send us a quick note at the bottom where it says Q&A. And then please keep your questions for the very end. We'll have a question and answer. So with that, David, if you want to start off.
Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. A bunch of us recently returned from the Gartner Digital Marketing Conference in San Diego, where there's lots and lots of talk about what CDPs are and where they fit into the marketing ecosystem. And this is an example of one of the types of charts that was well covered there, talking about how customer data platforms are essentially the marketing middleware that collects, unifies, and delivers data throughout the marketing and advertising technology stack for many of the world's largest brands. We also have our own white paper on the topic, which you can download, and it walks you through why CDPs are such a big deal right now and why you might need one and what to look for in a CDP. That's not what we're going to cover today. Today, we're going to focus on the why and the how of customer data platforms. These things are obviously related. If you don't have a clear why, you're destined to have a crisis of value or a crisis of implementation when it comes to the how. So we'll define these things in turn, talking about 3 CDP must-haves. Number 1, you must have a value to the customer. Number 2, value to the business. And number 3, you must deliver upon these expectations and be excellent at that. So I'll start by covering the first 2 topics, and my colleague Paul Mander will join us for the third. And we'll start with the value to the customer. Most CDPs, as I mentioned, starts with a technology problem, and that's really a mistake on a number of levels. But the technology problem looks something like this. People look at their current technology architecture and they say, well, we have all these different external vendors, whether it's Adobe Analytics or Facebook or Google or some other analytics provider such as Amplitude and a marketing automation system such as Campaign Manager or Marcis. Then we have all these internal systems, and maybe they're integrated through some fragile point-to-point methods, but there's a lot of data leakage, a lot of engineering effort that goes into that problem. This is probably this is a good place to start, but not a good place to finish in our view. CDPs certainly do solve a technology problem, but they're much more than that, and we think the focus should be squarely on the customer before the technology. Number 2 would be another 2 reason that a lot of people start to think about CDPs is as a solution to a data problem, and the data problem could look something like this. I have my media attribution data about which channels help me acquire a customer, but I'm not able to link that to my customer analytics that tells me the lifetime value of the customer, for example. Or you might say, I have all my email channels and those work great for orchestrating messages across email, but I'm not able to coordinate that with my push notification channels, which deliver maybe very similar messages over mobile devices. And again, a good place to start, but a bad place to finish. We think where you need to start when you think about the customer data platform is with the customer. You can't spell a customer data platform without it. And that means starting to think through the customer's journey, not just the journey as you imagine it through some internal whiteboarding exercise with your marketing team, with the actual lived experience of the customer, which in this day and age is highly mobile and multi-device, whether you like it or not. Forrester does this study every year of the CX index, the customer satisfaction index, and they found that 2017 was the first year where customer expectations, while they keep going up, marketers' ability to deliver on those expectations were flat or even down for a majority of brands. And mobile is the main contributor to that dilemma. Reason being that people expect whenever they pick up a mobile device to be completely connected to everything that they need in the immediate context at the moment they pick up that device. And this was a study from several years ago now that said the majority of consumers in the United States have made this mobile mind shift. So they're every day on Facebook, and they're doing their e-commerce on places like Amazon. And whether you compete directly or not with those companies, you do compete in the mindset of the consumer with the expectation that those companies have set. And so you could think of CDPs as a solution not just to integrate data and technology, but actually to integrate the customer experience to a level that people expect brands to be able to deliver no matter what category you're in. So with that mindset, the customer experience, and specifically the mobile mind shift, it really sets out pretty clearly what a CDP has to be able to do. It means that you have to be able to identify people across devices and at every stage in the journey. You have to be able to understand them in a really deep way as a whole person across let's say their behaviors, which might sit in a analytic system, their relationship histories, which might sit historically in some sort of CRM system, their marketing exposures, which might sit within a campaign automation system, and their situational context. Where are they at that very moment in time and space based on their geolocation data, for example? Be able to marry all that together in the moment and be able to deliver that across any channel. And that's not because of technology. That's because of customers and what they're expecting your brand to be able to deliver. If you're able to do that, you can create not just digital experiences like these, but also really breakthrough omnichannel ones like these, which matter more and more across every consumer category. So that's what we mean really when we talk about delivering and defining your value to the customer first and foremost. Now, you could deliver your value to customer, but you're not going to succeed if you're not also delivering value to the business. And that's what we mean when we're talking about the power alley here. You have to have the right balance of value to the business and value to the customer in order to be successful. And in a moment, I'll give you 3 examples of brands we've worked with who have developed just exactly that type of formula, each one which is slightly different. And the reason why it's important to define exactly and clearly how you're creating value for the customer as well as for the business up front is because customer data platforms, unlike pretty much any other marketing technology in history, touches so many different stakeholders across the organization. Not just the mobile and the web product development or marketing teams, but also the customer service and support teams, people who are very deep into the IT and engineering parts of the organization, data scientists and analytics, revenue and business operations, much more than historically where MarTech and AdTech have been focused on point solutions, primarily of use within a single function or discipline within the marketing department. Customer data platforms, by their very definition, are touched and need to align across a great many different disciplines. So in order to create that sort of clarity and alignment, it's very important to be very specific upfront about what sort of value you intend to deliver for the business and for these different functional groupings. So we're going to give you 3 examples. The first one is a company we work with in the e-commerce space, Overstock, which is a leader in their category. A couple months ago in November of last year, the CEO from Overstock was on the company's earnings call talking about how a competitor of theirs which is not Amazon. Not everyone competes head on with Amazon. But another competitor of theirs was spending an astronomical sum on customer acquisition, bidding up keywords, for example, that used to cost 15, 16 cents to over $2, and losing money essentially on every customer, but changing the landscape and creating this war of attrition that Overstock didn't want to play anymore. It was a losing battle. So here's a quote from their SVP of marketing talking about how they needed to flip the model. If they could switch to ensure that the site experience was personalized across the buyer's style, the color she likes, items within her budget, that'll ensure the greatest chance of success once you're able to acquire a customer, that you're able to convert and retain that customer. But that's really only just the beginning to their customer data vision. They also use the customer data platform, in this case mParticle, to integrate data not just for use on the website, but also across their paid media channels, and as well as through their owned media, especially email and push notification channels. So by creating a 360-degree view of the customer, they were able to flip the model from this, really uneconomical customer acquisition, cost-driven model to more of a holistic optimization of the return on marketing spend metric. So marketing spend is the objective. The activations were through these different digital channels, but I'd say overall this was a success story in driving increased marketing ROI. Different but related take on this is Postmates. They're a on-demand delivery service. In a way, they compete with UPS in the imagination of the customer because they position themselves as a logistics company, but they want to be this logistics company with the best customer experience, almost like UPS meets the Walt Disney Company. And customer experience is so important to them because that's what makes them different from the 1,000 other ways you can get food or packages delivered to your doorstep. They want to have simply the best and most magical customer experience. So for them, the customer data platform was really about driving that experience and creating long-term loyalty and satisfaction. So it wasn't enough just to integrate marketing data, as in the Overstock example that we just gave you. They also brought in data from their customer help desk, which in this case was Zendesk, from the product experience itself, various systems that tracked analytics and interactions with different features within the app. And we're able to marry these things together to create better intuition and then ultimately run experiments about, well, what levers should we pull? What if we increase marketing spend? What does that do to long-term customer value? Does that create more calls into our help desk, for example? What's the value of incremental investment into customer service on lifetime value? Is that better? Is that a better lever to pull than, for example, running more marketing campaigns? And through that lens, they're able to optimize for the metrics that they cared about around customer satisfaction and long-term value. Finally, the third example we'll give you is SeatGeek, the ticketing app. Their mission is to drive more efficiency into the secondary ticketing market. And their customer data platform was similarly oriented around efficiency metrics. They wanted to make sure that they were being nimble and using the best tools that were available to them without spending a lot of time and resources on engineering every integration. So initially they used mParticle to test and deploy a number of different services into the mobile app without having to implement a custom SDK for each one. And over time, they started to find other areas of efficiency, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But essentially, we have three examples here: one around marketing ROI, one around customer lifetime value and customer experience, and this third one around operational efficiency, all of them bring benefits to the company as well as to the customer. And that's the point we're trying to make here is you got to find your power alley and align your activities and objectives to your specific needs. So everyone's very clear about what the customer data platform is trying to achieve. So with that set up, I'll turn it over to Paul, who will talk us through some of the operational aspects and best practices of implementing a CDP.
Great. Thanks, David. So in terms of operational excellence, I think it all begins first with building your architecture, deciding what are the elements that you need to your architecture. And specifically, of course, we're talking about how a CDP fits into this. And to go through a customer-centric architecture, there's a few key elements that I'll talk to right now. So the first, if you look towards the top when we discuss data sources, what this is saying is that you really need to be sure you're collecting data from all of the channels with which your customer engages your brand. This would mean you're collecting the browsing behavioral data from your website, whether they're doing some product research, or if you're e-commerce type of business, collecting the actual transactions. The same goes for mobile apps. When we say voice here, this could be collecting interactions that they might be having with a chat bot through some application, or even down to a summary of an interaction with the call center. And also, conversely, if you're in a channel where you're interacting with your customers over connected devices, for example, again, collecting the behavioral data from there. And perhaps most importantly here is when we say back-end systems, this could mean something from a loyalty program. This could mean CRM data that you have going back years and years with your relationship with your customers. The key thing is making sure, one, you're collecting all that data, as I said, and two, that the data collection is really built natively for each of those channels. It's really important not to try to pigeonhole, say, data from a connected device into a construct that's more suitable for a website or vice versa. Right? Each of these data sources are different channels for your customers. Your customers will interact with them in different ways. Therefore, you do need a specific approach with each of those channels when collecting data from them. Then once that data is in your CDP, then it's really connecting that data to various destinations. So really the first, on the left side, you see some examples like analytics and attribution, A/B testing, etc. The key elements to look for there are one, that your CDP has the ability to stream that data in real time. And that's really important for both sides, actually, on the data out. If you look on the left and the right side of this chart. And what I mean by that is that if you're doing an A/B test or some personalization use case, it is key to have the most up-to-date information on your user or customer available to the channel that's doing the A/B testing or the personalization. In today's world, you can't afford to personalize experience to something that is no longer relevant for your customer. Perhaps they already made a purchase or they're browsing something else, and that old data is no longer relevant for that moment in time. So the moment in time is key. You want to the same thing would go for even the marketing side of the house, so not just personalization on your own properties, but say you're in paid media, your attribution tool is going to be providing you a lot of value and reporting on what paid media use cases, channels are working for you, help you make those adjustments on the fly to get the most ROI from your paid media. So you want to make sure that data is also available in real time. When we differentiate between events and audiences here too, and really you could put both events and audiences on both sides of this equation if you think about it, when you're looking at those various channels. But really what that means is having the flexibility to get the right sort of data to the right tool at the right time. There are some tools, like we mentioned with analytics or say attribution, where you do need to expose the raw data, what we call events and mParticle nomenclature, and get the raw data to these tools. Versus there's other tools where audience data is perhaps more important, meaning maybe you don't need the raw data there, but you need to get segmented user data into these platforms. So knowing which users are in which segments will help you with that marketing execution. But perhaps most importantly in all of this is really when we say customer-centric, it also means that your architecture, your CDP, has to be user-centric, right? And that's why we have the user at the center of this architecture. Collecting data from all of these various sources, two-way connections with those execution channels that I mentioned earlier, you need to be able to resolve all of these to one single view of the customer. Your CDP needs to have the ability to say, okay, I set a cookie on a user when they were on the web and then they authenticated. And at that point in time, perhaps I got an email address. I need to be able to have my CDP use that email address they saw on the website to connect it back to perhaps some data that I saw from the CRM system into the CDP, or it could be an email open data from my ESP back into the CDP. All of those discrete interactions, those discrete data points need to tie up to a single view of the customer so that as you propagate that data throughout the ecosystem, that you have it resolved to one profile and are able to efficiently execute upon all the things I mentioned earlier. So with all of that said, let's getting to the meat of, all right, how do we make all of this happen? The approach we like to take at mParticle is to think big and start small. So what do we mean by that? Let's start by the thinking big. On this slide here, we've laid out a sample architecture, just laying out some of the different types of connections and use cases someone could pursue through the mParticle CDP, along with some examples of each of the types of tools that could execute upon those. When embarking on this journey and saying, okay, we're going to think big, you should lay out the end state. What do I want my stack to look like? What are some of the key components? Do I need an attribution tool? Do I need a tool for marketing automation? What are the various channels that my customers interact with me and whose data I need to get into the platform? And where does it need to go? So lay out that end state first and have a vision for where you want to go. However, that said, we don't want to boil the ocean, right? So how do we talk about getting some incremental wins and starting small before we get to that big picture?
We have a quote here from one of our customers at Lilly Pulitzer, where they started with a very similar need as SeatGeek that I described earlier. They just wanted to achieve some engineering efficiencies by making it easier and faster to deploy new services, new digital services from third-party vendors without having to implement a lot of custom code. Quickly, though, they found a customer benefit that, as you see here, within weeks of implementing, there was a faster, more stable app experience as a result of removing all these third-party codes. Could you explain how that works, how they were able to achieve a faster, more stable app technically?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, this is one of the underlying benefits of a CDP, which perhaps gets a little lost in the discussion when you're talking about personalization and marketing execution. But it's really the technical win of having one integration that can connect you to a series of different tools. Tools that perform things across various functions, as we mentioned before. The win here is that without a CDP in place, you're really building some point-to-point integrations, right? And those point-to-point integrations are painful. And this is really the win for Lilly Pulitzer was that, okay, well, maybe at first the tool you deploy is analytics, as you can see from an example of this slide. And this is how Lilly went about it, is that the first tool they deployed through their CDP was an analytics tool. So you do all the work of understanding what your KPIs are, what you need to track for various teams across your organization, what you need to report on to your executive team, and then implement that data collection via your CDP, and then begin sending that data to your analytics tool. And that's really, commonly across our customer base, is really one of the first use cases they light up. Once that's done, right, farther down the line, there'll be needs to do some of the other things we mentioned, like attribution or other types of tools that really need to consume the same type of data. Without the CDP in place, each time one of those tools comes to the table, you've got to go, the business stakeholder who needs to use that tool has to go back to the technical team, do some horse trading, and get on that roadmap to say, hey, can you implement this code in our app or connect this API to our CRM database so that we can get this data into this attribution tool or to this email tool? Versus, well, if you did the exercise once and implemented your mParticle as your CDP, and in this case, right, we've connected mobile apps to the analytics tool, the next tool that comes along, there'll be an integration with the CDP and let the CDP do the work of integrating rather than you on the technical team taking away resources from your app development or whatever your core job is to do this integration. And furthermore, there's also the technical performance benefits. There's less third-party code that you need to manage and maintain or as you go about changing things in your environment, or even your partner whose SDK you implemented or whose API you connected to makes changes on their side, you need to keep up with them as well.
And this is true across every platform. We just highlight, I think, mobile here on the left, because mobile tool deployment is like open heart surgery, right? You have to cut open the app and create these SDKs, deploy them onto every end user's client, and it's just enormous engineering effort. Not that it is easy with getting data in and out of CRM systems or web systems either, but mobile is a whole nother level of complexity. And then on the analytics side, I was reading that the average brand has 2.5 analytics vendors. So it's never just one tool you're trying to deploy. There's always going to be multiple over time, and you might as well create a central data layer that you could deploy once and then federate everywhere.
Yeah, no, that's a good point too. And a lot of times some of those things are outside of your control. Like there could be vendors. The vendor landscape is always changing, right? We always see the new Lumasphere charts and all the other ones thrown about in the industry. And sometimes outside forces make you change vendors. Or to your point, you need more than one even without those outside forces. So the other problem that we tend to see with customers who don't use this sort of approach is that their data is inconsistent. Right? Really silly example, an e-commerce company might say, okay, it's called view product when someone views a product detail screen in tool A, and in tool B, it's called product view. And in one tool, it says, user exited 5 times yesterday, and the other tool says user exited 4 times. And it's because, this code was implemented 2 years ago, and then the person who that left the company and someone else did this next one. And right, you have this data problem where your data is not consistent across those channels as well.
Yep. So the good news is once you simplify the way your data gets collected and managed in a single platform, then it's also a lot easier to join up the data. And the next step in the stairway to heaven is to start to generate some additive insights. And the quote we have here is from our client who used to be at Jet, now part of Walmart. You don't want to be looking at app marketing in a silo. You want to look at how your app marketing is affecting web is affecting app. And with mParticle, we can send any data we want to third parties. We can send it back to mParticle. And most importantly, we can send that data from mParticle to our own databases. And what she's talking about here is really the primary use case we see from a lot of brands at this stage is longitudinal understanding of the customer journey for better marketing attribution. So to figure out, I acquired this customer through channel X. Did they stick around? Did they actually buy from me over the long run? So Paul, can you take us through how that works technically?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this sense, it's exactly like you said, Dave. The next use case to fire up through the CDP here was attribution. So an example, some of the vendors that you could use for attribution are here on this slide. And essentially, what those tools do is okay, they'll integrate with your paid media out there, so they'll know which ads are being served and who they're being served to. Then the CDP's role is really on the conversion front. So when the user will ultimately come back to your website, come back to your mobile app, they need to know what they performed, right? Whatever your campaign's goal was, that attribution tool needs to know that, so they can provide you that reporting to give those sorts of insights that you mentioned, that Lauren mentioned in that quote. Now, the key here is, and this is really where you begin to see the quick wins and the quick wins beginning to add up and climbing the stairway, is that, okay, great. So we already discussed before, we don't need to do another tech project to turn this attribution tool on. We've already implemented our CDP. So I'm going to have a pre-built integration here with the attribution tool. Few clicks, great. Now the marketing team has those insights into the marketing campaign performance that their attribution tool provides you. Well, a good CDP and mParticle will fall into this category, or so we like to think. We'll also have bi-directional integrations with said tools. So in other words, beyond just activating the attribution tool through the CDP, the other step in this was getting the attribution post-back data out of this attribution tool and back into the CDP. And guess what? So if we talk about the stairway and some quick wins, the work they already did before to integrate the analytics tool with mParticle is already bearing fruit, because as soon as they made this connection for the attribution tool back into mParticle, that marketing campaign performance data is now going to the analytics tool or tools of their choice. And now it's sitting alongside all of that other data about the revenue and other user behaviors and other KPIs that are being tracked for non-marketing use cases, right? Going right to the heart of the quote, which was, hey, we're not going to look at marketing, and in this case, it's really paid media within a silo. We're going to look at that performance alongside all the other behaviors and things that users are doing in the app or on the website, and tracking alongside all of our other KPIs that really fall outside of paid media.
So the CDP is not a attribution tool or analytics tool or replacement for those tools. It's an enhancement, it's an enabler for those tools to be more effective and have more complete picture of the customer journey. And Paul, you spent a lot of time previously in the DMP world, and it strikes me that that's one of the biggest differentiators between DMPs and CDPs is that the CDP is built really to persist data over long periods of time. We have some customers who are persisting data over many years. The cookie, I don't know, what's the average cookie lifetime, like 28 days or something like that.
About a month. Yeah.
It's not really, you can't really fulfill these use cases. But aside from that, aside from the longevity of the data, the ability to persist data, are there other sort of non-digital sources that you would include in this type of attribution or marketing analytics enhancement? Would this be a step in the journey where you might bring in some customer service data or product or sales data or other things beyond just the digital sources?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at any point in the marketing journey, right, so that those non-digital sources are some of your best data, right? This could be, for example, a loyalty program. And the work to get it in the CDP is sort of it's a one-time effort. But sort of as kind of underlying your point is that one-time effort, one, will connect that to analytics and all the other use cases here. But two, right, you want to build up that user profile in the CDP. And I guess if we're talking about CDP versus DMP a bit, that really the main difference is that a lot of DMPs, they're great tools that were really effective at getting cookie-based data downstream to DSPs, SSPs, ad servers, etc. But really, they always had to tie things back to a cookie, right? Even if you imported a CRM database, you had to see a user on a website, have them log in, do a lookup in a hashed file, and you match it to a cookie. Whereas CDP, you don't really have to marry that lookup of the CRM data to your website. Natively say, okay, let's just ingest that data based on the user's email address or based on some sort of CRM ID. And then as we see users, sure, we'll tie that single user profile together, but channels such as email, for example, where there's no point going back to a cookie ID when you're activating to your ESP, you want to send it against an email address. A CDP will take that data against the email, marry it to anything else that you might have and send it downstream. So certainly, yeah, it's always a good time to get those non-digital sources into the CDP, and that's really where CDPs excel relative to maybe some of the web-based tools out there.
Yep. So now we will start to talk about activating the data into engagement channels, but we're not even going to talk about advertising yet. We'll get there in a minute. We're going to talk about a very sophisticated use of owned messaging channels, which is the company Via, which is a ride-sharing service. And Ori from Via has this quote. He says, "We can really understand the specific context of every rider as he or she opens the Via app and starts to request the ride request process." So the person opens the app and they get a personalized experience based on their physical geolocation. And by doing this, we're able to maximize the likelihood that the rider will end up booking on the platform. Now I know from speaking to Ori that behind the scenes, a lot more is happening. A lot of people open the app. I'm a regular Via customer. And what holds for me holds true for a lot of people. If you don't see a car within 7 to 10 minutes of where you are, you'll probably shut it down and use a different ride sharing app. There are advantages to using Via. The cars are the best in the New York City area. It's cheaper because it's a great ride sharing service. But if there's not a car in the area, you really don't want to wait 15 minutes for that vehicle. So what Via does behind the scenes is as soon as you close down the app, it then sends a bunch of messages to drivers who are in the nearby vicinity again, using the CDP to power these communications, say, hey, something might be going on. Actually, just on Saturday, I got out of Madison Square Garden, ordered a Via, and a Billy Joel concert happened to be letting out at the same time that I arrived at Madison Square Garden. So I'm sure a lot of people were opening up the Via app, and Via was actively communicating with all the drivers saying, get yourselves over to Madison Square Garden. Then what happens is if I had originated the request and did not fulfill it, I'll get a message back from Via saying, hey, there are more drivers in their area. Do you want to give us a second look? So this is a great example of using situational context married with messaging channels to drive better customer experiences and really better business outcomes. So talk us through how that works a little bit.
Yeah. So what does that mean for CDP and implementing one and standing one up? So one of the key activations for many customers via their CDP are marketing automation tools, and you see an example of a couple on the screen right now. So for the VA example, right, it's okay. We've got data coming into the CDP again, coming from mobile apps, right? Key channel for VIA, of course. Those mobile apps are feeding that information into the CDP about, hey, the user is at the Billy Joel concert. The user may or may not be looking for a ride. You'll know things about the user's account. That data then feeds into the marketing automation tool. Key point for VIA too, right? If you think about it, they have a multi-sided marketplace, if you will, right? So VIA needs to message their passengers, their customers, right? Hey, you're leaving Billy Joel now, there, save 10% or whatever the marketing message might be. There's, and get home with VIA. And they also need to tell their drivers, hey, there's a Billy Joel concert and there's going to be a ton of customers coming to this area. And so that the drivers can make adjustments as well. So really the real-time nature of the CDP's ability to get data to marketing automation tools and really any sorts of tools is key here. Now, if we continuing on the stairway theme, or actually going back to the stairway theme, I should say, right? So we've got marketing automation in place. We've got the behavioral data in real time coming from users, mobile apps, and aware of their location, aware of their actions. Well, when VIA needs to make those decisions as to, what is our strategy? When do we send those drivers, or when do we message the riders? Right? Having that, they, just like all the other customers, they have also implemented their analytics tool through the CDP, right? So the analytics tool then, of course, gets that data as well. They're, as I mentioned before, feeding it to their marketing automation tool, but it will also get the campaign performance data out of those automation tools and back into the CDP. In other words, now after that Billy Joel concert, they'll go back and they'll say, okay, well, did this really work for us? And it's not going to be just in a silo of like, okay, well, who opened the push or who opened the email or whatever their messaging was. They'll be able to look at that alongside all of the other data, behavioral data from apps and websites in their analytics tool, but also, and this is, I know why you asked the question before, David, any other CRM data they might have, right? Those offline channels, any sort of propensity scoring or modeling VIA might have done. Enter all of that into the CDP. Again, we've got that in the analytics tool. We're using that to power some of our marketing automation. And we're also bringing in that campaign performance data back in to continuously improve upon what we're doing, right? So again, you see those quick wins adding up, and the effort that we did a long time ago to implement that once and get into our analytics tool is paying off as we become more sophisticated with our usage of data for various marketing activities.
And let's talk about advertising just for a minute. How does all this apply to advertising? Because obviously that's another, paid media is another area where you'd want to activate data. Do the same rules apply to cookie-based systems, or are we only talking about identity-based advertising? Like what's the common kind of pathway when it comes to just the paid media types of execution?
Yeah, I think the main thing is, and this is where a CDP is key, is that a lot of, we just talked about notifications and emails and push notifications and email, right? Those aren't cookie-based type of messaging. And those aren't paid media either. But, there's some, as a marketer, you're always deciding, okay, well, what is going to be the right channels? There's times where paid media is the right channel. There's times where an email or a push is the right channel. Not doing that in a silo is important, right? So you'll know that perhaps you might want to customize an email knowing that this user had interacted with your Facebook ad or had done something with you on paid media. So that could be a huge factor in deciding the when or the how of messaging that you might be doing in a channels such as push or email. So the paid media might have been on a cookie. The second message might have been against an email address. The key is, again, having that architecture that can easily manage data through all the channels in this and try to pigeonhole everything into, say, like a web-based or mobile-only based sort of construct.
Well, that feeds well to our last example, and then I think we'll have a few minutes for questions if people have any, is getting back to Overstock, that until now we've really talked about a lot of predefined segments and orchestration rules. So if someone opens the app and is in Madison Square Garden area but does not book, then do this. When it comes to Overstock, they're using a fairly sophisticated integration with a machine learning engine to generate custom scores that are constantly being modified on the fly and then writing those back as attributes to mParticle. And I know that one of the modeled attributes actually is channel propensity. So deciding whether people are more likely to be email engagers or ad engagers, and then making that decision between paid and owned based on the person's profile as opposed to some aggregate understanding of what channel they think performs best in general. I know other types of scores they're creating are obviously customer lifetime value, time of day, and all these are through a really interesting machine learning integration. So why don't we wrap up by just kind of getting a bit of a peek into how that looks and how that fits into the diagram that we've been building here.
For sure. So, generically and again, it's a sample architecture, so this isn't specifically what any one of those customers did, protecting, of course, the security of their architecture. That's really key at the bottom where you see data warehouse or internal data cloud, or insert whichever data buzzword you want to use. But for Overstock, it's a two-way street, right? It's feeding all of the behavioral data from website, from mobile app, as well as marketing, campaign, email opens, push opens, paid media attribution data, and e-commerce data, et cetera, into that machine learning system. Then let this best-in-class system that's going to do all this analysis for you, set up whatever propensity scoring you need, do its thing, and then build an integration from that tool back into your CDP, such that once you know that, okay, this particular user has this propensity, that'll inform many different use cases, right? For the one you mentioned, David, right, would be that, okay, maybe a paid media type of execution that you will want to reach them on this channel with this sort of messaging. I know for Overstock, a big one is within their own property. So so there's paid media is key, but certainly that they know that in today's world their customer expects everyone likes to say Omnichannel. I think they're a good example of someone who's actually making it happen. They're taking data from one channel and knowing that user did this or user bought that on a website, and then tailoring an experience within a mobile app based upon that data, and also factoring in, like I said, other data that might have happened in paid media or email open and so forth. The key thing there is just having that connection, so it's not just your third-party tools to do whose logos you see on the left and the right of the slide, but also internally, if we're using some data warehouse or some of the tools that that Overstock is using for analytics or to personalize an experience, making sure that those are properly connected to your CDP. And again, hitting upon the similar themes we had before, that we're resolving the right identities. We knew in this channel it was a cookie, in this channel it was an email address, and we're making that data available in real time. I think that's also, that also goes back, that's probably perhaps the most important thing here when you're talking about personalization, is that the data is available in real time in both like a push and a pull model.
Yeah, David Raub, who's considered the father of CDPs, an independent analyst. Maybe he's on this webinar with us today. I saw him post the other day on social media that doing personalization with bad data is like trying to cook with bad vegetables, bad ingredients. It doesn't matter how good your cooking skills are. If the ingredients are bad, the personalization is going to be bad. The customer experience is going to be bad. So you could sort of think of CDPs as like providing the freshest, ripest ingredients, but not replacing the artistry of the chef, which is either the data sciences teams or the machine learning engines that they employ. So to wrap up, kind of a couple best practices that we've covered today would be one, starting with the customer and their journey, and thinking about the customer value before thinking about the technology architecture and the business objectives. But then a fast follow is aligning the business objectives so that you're in that power alley where you're fulfilling both business and customer objectives. And then creating a map to galvanize all these diverse stakeholders across your organization so they can really understand about what a CDP will deliver in terms of their customer experience, in terms of their business needs and your particular customer experience, because not all CDP implementations are the same. There are many different reasons for a CDP, probably as many different business strategies as there are out there in the world. We don't want to say that it's by no means kind of a cookie cutter model. Then stay with the customer by deploying a customer-centric architecture along the lines that Paul laid out, putting the customer user profile at the center and surrounding it with real-time event and audience integrations. Create and iterate on the right plan, which essentially has you thinking big but starting small and showing incremental value along the way. Incremental value, as in the case of Lily Pulitzer, can be, as fast as within a few weeks. You should be showing wins probably every 100 days. You could be deploying new use cases and, using that to galvanize the organization around the CDP program. And as you said, the wins aren't linear. They're in many cases exponential. The value increases exponentially the more data and connections are integrated.
Thank you both so much for.
Sorry about that.
Well, thank you both so much again. Sorry about that right there, folks. We hope that you really enjoyed this webinar, and we have a couple of questions asked by a few of our attendees. And if you haven't actually sent one in, but have a burning question you'd like to hear answered, at the bottom of your page, you'll see a Q&A box, and you should be able to hit that in right there. So the first one that we have here is, what is the best way to get data to DMPs and DSPs? Do I still need a DMP?
Yeah, so I think the question about whether you need a DMP is in fact entirely unrelated to the question of whether you need a CDP. But I think that tends to come up a lot because DMPs were probably one of the first digital platforms that was used to get data to marketing channels. So it's certainly understandable why there's some confusion out there. There's a lot of things DMPs do well that I think CDPs aren't trying to do. Right? There's a lot of pre-built, for example, the third-party data marketplaces, right? All the DMPs come in with a lot of third-party data pre-built into the system. And there's a lot of good use cases for that third-party data, like upper funnel, right? And activating that on paid media channels. So if you're really looking to leverage some of that third-party data that is primarily tied to a cookie, essentially, right? I mean, and in fact, as we see with GDPR and other privacy initiatives, a lot of that data can ever only be tied to a cookie. Then certainly you should use a DMP to layer that, to send that to various SSPs, DSPs, and such to run display ad campaigns. And those are the right tools to do that sort of job. I think if you're looking to execute upon some of the use cases that we discussed today, and you're really looking to get data to various channels, get data in real time, both digital data and non-digital data, cookie-based data, email-based data. Then really the CDPs is the right tool for the job. And increasingly what we're seeing is that a DMP ends up being a big recipient of data from a CDP, right? So in other words, a DMP is a great, like as I mentioned, a great execution channel for some of those paid media use cases that we mentioned. So leverage your CDP's capabilities, leverage all the work that you did to integrate your CDP, and sure, activate that in your DMP.
Great. So another question here. You mentioned Lily Pulitzer. Do most retailers start with mobile app? I assume they mean a CDP implementation.
Yeah, I think I don't think there is a trend in either direction. I mean, if we look at our customer base, it's pretty split. Sometimes it's just dictated by a development calendar, which one you end up doing first. Sometimes it's also where within the enterprise the priority came from. A team that's really focusing on mobile, a company that's focusing on mobile as a big channel might have more resources galvanized and ready internally to do work on the mobile app versus on the website. So often decisions like that end up dictating which channel goes first. For Lilly, that happened to be where they were at that point in the time. So other businesses just know that, hey, our website is still the most important channel. For whatever reason, mobile is not, or vice versa. It may be a mobile-only business. So, if you're only one channel, of course, that's the channel you implement. But when you're omnichannel, I think there's no right or wrong order to do it. It just ends up being what is right for that customer at that time.
I think part of it's the practical matter of, like you said, the development calendar, also the strategy that's in place at the moment. So Overstock did not start with mobile. That was another perfect example of someone starting with web and expanding outward. But mobile is, in Lilly's case, a very important loyalty channel, very small but engaged number of users, not driving a lot of transactions, but driving a very important customer experience. And particularly for millennial customers, which were of particular high value. So creating the best experience for them, has to start with mobile, and that's where they're the least development resources. Typically, companies said, okay, we've got enough development resources on web, but then mobile is like this order of magnitude greater data challenge, especially when you talk about having multiple platforms, Android, iOS, and others. That is not atypical for people to find a major need and start there where there's the house on fire type of issues.
So this is actually just a quick follow-up to that one. Do you need an app to utilize mParticle?
Absolutely not. You could even say you don't need a website to utilize mParticle. I think that the key is to, is if you have user data, there's use cases for you with a CDP. If you have user data you want to execute upon, I should say, then there's use cases for you to have a CDP. So you don't need a mobile app only to use mParticle. You don't need a website only to use mParticle. If you have data tied to your user and you want to get that data into another system to do marketing or analytics or anything in that realm, I think you've got a use for a CDP.
Yep.
Great. So we have just two more quick ones here. The first one is, what about the GDPR? Can I still collect customer data?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think actually a key CDP feature that just based on the use cases we mentioned today, we didn't get a chance to unpack more. And a key part of mParticle is really controlling your data, right? We talked a lot about activation and how effective that can be, but really controlling data, and this is, I'll tie it back to GDPR in a moment, is key to executing successfully. Knowing where your PII should or should not go, and being able to change that on the fly as some things like GDPR happen, or as your regulatory, as some certain things might change within your business, is key. So, in terms of GDPR and how that that hits mParticle, right? With those controls, a set of those does apply to GDPR. In other words, what we see our customers doing is with GDPR, they're collecting consent, right? There's a greater focus on that, a greater need for transparency around that. So users will interact with them on websites or mobile apps, and they'll say, hey, do you consent to marketing and et cetera. Users who agree, users might agree, users might not agree. Really, with the use of a CDP, it really helps you in a few ways. The first is, let's say they don't agree for marketing, but that doesn't mean you don't have a right to collect any data on them, right? If they're still your customer, you probably will still you need to know who they are to provide e-commerce or to certain analytics that are in-house and not third party. So what our customers do is they'll send that consent information into mParticle, and then some of our GDPR capabilities really allow you to say, okay, well, this user did not consent to marketing, so do not send their data to any marketing-based tools. This user did consent to something else, so their data will only go to certain types of tools. So it really is a framework within the CDP to allow you to control where data goes based upon what consent they may or may not have received. And really beyond GDPR, you can apply that same sort of framework, and we're already seeing this from some of our customers for other types of regulations that deal with messaging and advertising, things like HIPAA when you're dealing with healthcare data, VPPA for collecting video viewership data, COPA for if you have an app that might be, or a website where there might be content geared towards minors.
Yeah, there's a longer version of this presentation, if you could believe it. where I would group GDPR under the simplify step in the customer journey and the stairway, because just by simplifying and reducing the amount of third-party code in the app, having a consistent methodology and strategy for data collection and federation, it doesn't solve all of your GDPR problems, but it solves and addresses a good deal of them. And that is a customer win as well as a business win, because the worst customer experience in the world is a company that misused your data or experienced worse, even a data breach. And so for security and data protection reasons, data simplification is actually a quick win of a CDP as opposed to a kind of the opposite of liability. CDP gets your data in order, cleans up your house, and then downstream lets you activate it in responsible ways.
Great, and so we just have this last one. I apologize if we're not going to get to your question right here, but we do encourage you to please get in touch with us. As you can see, we have David and Paul's contact information right here. We're more than happy to answer via email. But so last one, does mParticle help with global frequency capping? How does a CDP help with cross-channel coordination?
Yeah, so I think a CDP can be a key part of those sorts of things, right? So obviously frequency capping is something you will set in the execution layer, right? Whether if you're frequency capping paid media, it's in whatever channels serving paid media. If you're frequency capping email or push, it's going to happen in the tool that delivers those messages. But the key role for a CDP and all of that is making sure that those tools have the right data in order to adjust the frequency caps, right? So in other words, you might frequency cap just based on like, all right, I know if it's three greater than 3 messages, I never want to do it again. Or you might do some more sophisticated journey building, if you will, that takes into account, I might be frequency capping in paid media, but based upon the user having seen an email as an example, right? Most paid, I don't think I know any paid media source that talks directly to an ESP. That's where a CDP is key, where if you get your email open data into the CDP and then use that to drive your segmentation that's going to be happening in paid media, then when it's time to frequency cap the paid media, you can do it based upon a user receiving a particular email with the CDP as that glue that's speaking, that's going to make sure that the ESP is aware of what's going on in paid media.
Great. Well, again, thank you both so much for joining us today, and all of you at home and at work. This has been recorded and will be sent out to you following the end of this, but otherwise, we hope that we'll see you next time.
Thank you.